All right, welcome back to the podcast episode number 2. And Javier, great to have you with me.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and so on this episode, we really wanted to take a chance to address some common things that we see, a theme that reoccurs over and over again with the content that we put out, because we are very proactive about everything that we do. We come from a philosophy of taking action and doing something about the issues that we see in the world. And we inevitably provoke the other side of the coin to come out of the woodworks and say, oh, well, you don't actually have any rights, and the state will just trample you, and the resistance is futile. And so we wanted to dive into what rights do we actually have.
That's very good. I like it because you know what? It brings me to a more general sentiment, which is good because as soon as we started the podcast, it kind of came to me because I was thinking about, what's his name, Schwab, and his use of resources to kind of peddle this narrative. And because he has larger pockets and has these institutions, he can put this sentiment out there like, this is what we're going to do. And it's very easy for other companies and really social platforms and to really feed into that. And I don't know about you, man, but I've seen so much of people kind of like pointing over and like, you see like now it's taking place, like now it's happening. But I like to always kind of point back in history and a lot of propaganda that we've been given throughout the years. It's kind of the same recycled material. They're telling us that the new world order is right now. This is the missing element, that they're just going to do this one more thing and then it's all over. And we're all just going to divide ourselves. And really, I think it's, a much, much longer process and more practical than people think, than it is this, constant berating that, we're being attacked and that there's nothing that we can do about it and we're at the mercy of the wind.
Yeah, I've long said that the way in which the system works, and I personally don't think that there's any one architect who has all the levers and the dials that they adjust. That the system is always especially with the media system, they always portray this image as if everything is just about to fall apart. Calamity is just around the corner. And it's like, fool me once, okay. Fool me twice, I don't know. But sometimes especially in the truther world, in the freedom world, every single time something happens, oh, doom and gloom is on the horizon. Oh, doom and gloom is on the horizon. It's like, at some point, if you're making the same mistake over and over again, you got to adjust your script a little bit. And
isn't it, sorry to interject, but isn't it also like a sales tactic, right? You're really putting a critical condition around you that may or may not exist, if we're all honest. But if we can create a condition for that person and portray that this volatility, this fear, this unknown is out there, that if they just did this one thing, that this will all be fixed and that we will be moving and we won't be so against whatever is coming, so to speak.
Right. And that is a pattern that I've noticed, especially with the new media, you could call it, which is all of these content creators that are, trying to get the truth out there as they see it.
But it gets clicks.
Well, unwittingly, exactly. They are falling subject to the exact same type of sensationalism that created the vacuum for them to exist, the need for them to exist in the first place. And we're watching this pattern kind of unfold. And it's kind of glorious, honestly, to see that people see the problem. Oh, the news is exaggerating and lying and omitting facts to make a point or to be sensational. And now we're seeing the exact same thing happen privately. It really points to, hey, this is a human nature problem, not necessarily, dark hooded figures pulling the buttons and levers and controlling people.
Yeah, I think also there's, an element to it just being straight business, like when we look at human behavior and how it responds, we can see that it's predictable. So we can't blame why people react the way that they do. We should look at, how we allow that to come into our homes, how that allows us to be in our mind, in our body, and all of that. Because as we start to create these things outside of us, these platforms, like, we have to be very careful what we tend to believe, especially in the world of law, finance. And guess what? We have huge institutions right now that every single day they're telling you this is the state of the world. And we have to make a decision. And a lot of those times I see that those decisions, if enough fear is put into a situation, it kind of triggers a default response. And I think that after a while, certain people in the marketplace, including Washington, understand that and are using that to their advantage. So it's like, hey, doom and gloom, this is what's going to happen. We're going to move into AI. There was going to be a series of events, it's going to create an enormous chain reaction of people creating, spaces for money to flow in. And those things aren't necessarily very good. They have other interests, obviously, that are greater than our own.
Yeah. When you brought up Klaus Schwab, it actually, a really cool idea came to my mind, in that we always look to these billionaire, super wealthy power figures, and we point the finger at them as the problem, right? What happens when we flip that script? What happens when we say, what if they are the solution? What if we take this billionaire class and we look at the things that they do, and then we replicate that on a small scale? We don't have billions of dollars, but what we do have is billions of people. So what if we take this model of, oh, well, if they want to enact change in the world, what do? They create a foundation. They create all these little charitable endeavors to suit their goal. And of course, we could argue they are using a shadowy kind of just a shadow version of that, but we don't have to do that. What would it look like if every single person was proactively creating a charitable endeavor that they were pursuing to enact the change that they believed in? Imagine that world.
It's one of those things that we want to believe that they're doing. We want to believe that they're doing the heavy lifting for us. Every time we justify, paying our taxes and, biting the bullet in the public world, doing our commercial business, we're feeding into this belief that this is actually happening, rather than putting the weight of what's happening in the world, not by, putting it all on me individually as a sole person, but what I can do as a role, so I can continue to actually be productive and make decisions not based on fear, but rather, organization, because it is these shadow things. But what we have to realize is that they're quicker and faster to organize than we were. And so because of that, there's a reason why, and a responsibility to look at what has been organized, to see if, is this working for us? Do I understand the agreements? Do I understand my rights? Do I understand my benefits in this whole deal? And if the answer is no, that it probably warrants a little investigation.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great sequitur into the overarching point of this episode, in that, what are the rights that we actually have? Now, you could, of course, frame the discussion and say, oh, well, only those laws which are respected by the state are actual rights that are respected by the state, or rights that you actually have. I personally think it doesn't matter if you are in Maoist China or if you are in the 1790 in the United States. Your rights are the same. And your rights do not come from the legislation. They do not come from any governing body. It is always up to the individual to preserve and enforce the value of their rights.
It's going to be very difficult to try for people to see the fact that that's the case now, because of the condition that we're in, because of what has already taken place. And I wrote something, and I'm going to read it, just before I actually hopped on this call.
Sure.
I wrote it because I thought about it, and as a good thinker, I like to question a lot of things. And one of the things that was in my mind was like, well, who gave us our first rights? And then I said, wait a minute, do we give? Can we give a right? And so in response to, that question, this is what I wrote down. I said, the rights of man have never been given. Like, how can it be given? It doesn't make sense. Nor have they been inherited as a gift, nor have they been acquired for consideration. But man's rights have actually been bestowed upon him by and inalienably by God. So it follows then that man may also, and here's the other side, have the right to freely surrender those rights. Right? If we're truly free, we have the same right to give those rights away. Those rights for an exchange. Now, whatever the terms of the exchange may be, must be free of deception, coercion, and fraud to constitute a valid contract. But there is a series of congressional resolutions, foreign bankers, and an economic crisis. Very specific administrative processes took place in order for your estate, all your property, and life to essentially be transformed into commercial security with its own set of laws, rights, and jurisdictions that govern its activity. These rights are distinct from those that have been declared in Constitution.
Great. That's a great synopsis of the core essence of how rights exist, and by virtue of commercialization, you could say, and statutization.
Because most of the time when people think of rights, they think of most likely what you and I are thinking of, which is natural rights. The act and right of God that is apparent in nature. And then the second thing I think that people will conceptually think about when they think about the word rights is their civil rights, property and so on and so forth, for due process, these things. And it's a combination of these things that in the fine print, we've exchanged a lot of what we think of as freedom. And we've exchanged those things in supplement for cheap legislation. And we have consented and accepted that remedy as a fact. And by assuming that remedy and assuming that law, we actually give into their construct, which is this legal fiction, which is the way that the commercial contracting world works. And, the rules of admiralty and maritime law that rule all of these negotiable instruments. These are the things that essentially people get completely lost over because they don't know the order. And so they get these other small administrative laws and, one within another. And then there is this whole geographic layer. But what I think is the most important thing to not forget is the principles, because essentially it's the principle of the thing that is going to keep you understanding what you're doing. Otherwise, people are going to continue to create their estates in a way that is filled with risk, filled with liability, filled with ability for creditors, the IRS, the government, anybody to come in and seize those things, because that they understand the nature of those contracts. They understand the nature of those implied laws that don't even have to be written in order for them to be performed and obligated by you. And if not, they can take your freedom. And so, a lot of these things, most to the average person, it might not matter to them. But when it comes down to everyday living, when we talk about our homes, the amount of energy it takes to work and get up every day to put these things, then it starts to become extremely apparently personal, in that it's really conducting and setting the tone for what you believe you're doing every single day. Because I don't understand how people can live in a world where they're like, yeah, what he's saying and what the World Economic Forum, like, that's what we're going to, and that's unfortunate, but that's all we have. There is nothing else. And that's not true. We have so many different weapons, and a lot of it starts with discrimination. A lot of it starts with just asking the right questions, looking at the organization. And then from there, we'll be able to dig ourselves out of the situation, but we certainly can't solve the problem by using more security notes, by using more fictitious notes that really, it's all in their jurisdiction.
Yeah, and so getting back to this common thing that we deal with people saying, oh well, there's no point in resisting, you don't actually have any rights, the government is all powerful. They don't say it in that way per se, but that's essentially what they're saying. When a human being exists as you and I exist, we have these inalienable rights granted to us given to us by God from inception. Just because there is a legislation, just because there is an aperture of law or a system in place that impinges on those rights or criminalizes those rights or somehow makes exercising those rights make you at risk of losing your freedom altogether, that doesn't change the rights. It doesn't change fundamentally that when you wake in the morning, you don't have to sign an application for a license to get out of bed. That's an inherent right that you have. Just because the system has set structures in place, just because it has gotten off the rails per se, that doesn't change your human obligation to perform on your God-given freedom. No. The idea that just because these statutes and these laws and this tyranny has grown around us like a mold or a sludge, that doesn't mean that somehow now your solution is to say, oh well, look, there's sludge. What's the point? But obviously, that is a self-defeating argument and is thus absurd for anybody who wants to do anything positive in life.
It's really hard to try to build anything on stuff like that.
Right.
Because it's more of a fleeing and I don't understand and there's chaos. And we can't face the world like that. Like when we look at a problem, we have to think, we have to see clearly, see what's going on, and then be able to tackle it practically. There is no such thing as magic. Everything is just practical steps. And I think that what we have so far, because people have opinions of, oh, America is the greatest nation, or it's not the greatest nation, it's all that. It's like, regardless of what people's idea or perception, it's what we also have in contract, which is the US Constitution, the way that we've been able to protect our inalienable right to contract with ourselves, learn how to administer a state, and conduct our affairs without a third party, including the government. Like, these are the things that, for some reason, have just been shoved under the couch, been broomed under the carpet, so to speak. And now there's this new emphasis on, well, this is a statutory law. This is like, go ahead and read how statutory interpretation actually happens. You'll be surprised to find that it's all based on common law. And great legislators don't want to include a lot of exclusive language, because then it removes the existing benefits that we don't have to say. Just like Matt says, we don't have to say, oh, I need to sign something to wake up. It's like, well, if someone thought about that, then that also would be in legislation. I guarantee you. But because that hasn't been apparent yet, and because there's no monetary interest there, at least to the public commercially, there isn't. But, this is what stops companies from privatizing things like air and water and et cetera. So we have to know where we draw the line as far as like, well, this is unacceptable, but also where do we begin to pick up the pieces? And I think this is one of the biggest, it's one of the most underrated things. It's like, well, where do we begin to pick up the pieces? Because everyone is already so quick to throw out our idea of American Revolution, about property, life, and liberty, all that out the door, and forget about the last thousands of years that civilization has faced with these problems. It's incredible. We have to read the books of the founding fathers to really get a great perspective as to the things that they were dealing with. And there are a lot more volatile, there's way more considerations and way more things to worry about than your measly social security benefit, but it starts with being able to assess where our part is in it, the whole thing.
Yeah. And, people are looking for a starting point. The people who are proactive and are incentivized or already feel a sense of urgency or obligation to do something, to make a change, they are looking for a starting point. The average person, I think, has been so beaten down by the education system, by the media system. You go to school, if you have any idea that's not exactly what's in the textbook, you get beaten down, told you don't know anything. That's a very hardcore program. So I think a majority of people, they don't even know that they're looking for somewhere to start. But for those that are, luckily, hey, let's just give a little wave to those people that are looking for a place to start, because hey, we have one. Understanding the basics of the difference between living human beings and entity types, and how creation of entity types lends itself into various jurisdictions. This is the starting point for anybody who is sane and anybody who wants to actually start affecting change. If you want to do what I alluded to earlier, which is copy the Bill Gates model, copy the Klaus Schwab model on a small scale with you, where you can affect change, that is where you start.
Yeah, it's important that people realize that it shouldn't get to the point that someone is protesting outside. It shouldn't get to that point. If it gets to the point, it's already too late, because there's nothing that simple paperwork could not have handled in the beginning. And there is a way to be able to structure your life in order to make way for a new way to live your life, a private managed life. So, what we do is we deal with private estates, private trusts. And so by being able to take control of our estate, thinking about the properties, the assets, thinking about where they exist today, the openness to their liability, to the risk, all of these things consider. Because all of these things, as we mentioned, are basically built on sand. The United States government, the creditors, have very easy access to those funds. And it doesn't make any sense that, people are not aware that they can take advantage of creating an irrevocable trust to be able to manage their affairs, to simply be able to do something like this. You do not have to let it go to probate. You do not have to let the courts decide what to do with your hard-earned money, or the things that your children and the things that you wish to pass down in your legacy.
Yeah, and I think that for the most part, people don't understand just how revolutionary that act is. And I hope that we do a good job of conveying the awesome power of that potential, because it does change everything. It transforms this kind of de facto way of operating in the world. And people complain about the de facto government that has taken over. Well, the de facto government started within us. It starts within the complacency of the people, as I say all the time. So if you want to do something, you must take radical responsibility for your own contributions to the problem. Anything else is it's hoping for a super hero to come in and swoop in and save the day.
It's unrealistic, and no real man has any time for that type of stuff. Like, we need real solutions, and we need to be able to have them now. And that's why, at least here with Frontier Capital Trust, what we do best is making sure that whatever asset, whatever situation that you're in, is like, you're ready for a trust. You're ready for an express trust, because not every single person coming into this world of managing their private assets and all of this stuff. And let's just be clear, Matt, I don't think we made this clear. You do not have to be wealthy. Absolutely not. You do not have to be wealthy. This used to be the case, but really what we're talking about is people with education. This education is with us now, and we can be able to express it and share it, and everyone should be able to do this. This is your own right. Very similarly to creating your own will Everyone out there should be ready to create their own irrevocable trust. Not doing this every single day that goes by is leaving your estate up to those people who are going to perpetuate a system that we know is squandering resources.
Well, and the mechanism behind that is the fact that all of the entity types, all of the legal entities that you are using are public franchises. And that's the one of the major linchpins that people need to wrap their head around. Yes, you as a living human being are free and sovereign in God. But when you decide to start using public franchises, if you're going to use state public property, there's going to come with state public regulations. And,
Yeah.
and the major hurdle that people need to get over is to see that that is a reality.
Yeah.
By understanding what contracts you have already consented to and are engaged in, you can finally zoom out enough to see, well, hey, maybe I can do this another way with a private entity. If you don't take that first step of recognizing, hey, it looks to me like every single thing I have is held by a public franchise entity, then you're never going to face a solution or be in a position to solve anything.
Yeah, it's one of those things that if only people saw how simple this concept is, because really you're either acting on behalf and of or in a mode of doing something. So for the most part, people are acting as beneficiaries, and they're bearing the burden, the risk, all the liability until they say so. But most people aren't saying so. They're completely leaving a major wound open, let's say, for all these things that are valuable to escape through and bleed you out. So, one of the things that we tell people is, if you just consider going to our website, consider going to our Instagram, do research on your own on what it means to hold an asset inside a trust and what that looks like expressively and what that looks like irrevocably and what that looks like as a contract trust and the terms involved, you're going to find that there's so much more liberty for you there than you're going to find in some, an attorney. And they might give you what you're looking for and they're going to charge you for it. But it's not going to have the protection. It's not going to have the privacy. It's not going to have the elements that essentially were promised to us as private citizens in the beginning. And so, just for all of those that understand who are currently having businesses and that have LLCs and corporations, you can restructure, you can move into operating a trust. And there are other ways to be able to handle and manage other assets through these trusts. It's just a matter of investigating, asking the right questions and seeing if this is possible. And so that's why we're here. It doesn't matter, what situation that you're in. We're going to be very diligent about making sure that, the way that you approach this is correct.
Yes, and that's a huge aspect of why I feel so blessed to be a part of this endeavor, because for my entire adult life, since I've been able to question and think for myself, I've been wanting a solution. I've been wanting an answer. I've been wanting a direction to move in to affect some positive change. And just so happens, I know that you share that sentiment, that now we find ourselves in a position where we have a solution that we know applies to everybody's situation, and we get to work with people one-on-one and in class and group settings of helping them take complete stock of their situation, decide when and where to plug in these powerful instruments, and then benefit from that. It's a total revolutionary way of looking at things.
Yeah, it's like we're putting you in this, like if guys, I like the word trust vehicle, it's like if the trust was a vehicle, we're putting you in it. And that's like the Batmobile. It's got all the bells and whistles. It's got everything that you never thought could be inside the car. Mm-hmm. And now you're in this, trust container and you're like, wait a minute, I can make, a debt note. Oh my gosh, I could issue a bill of sale. Oh, I can hire employees. I can hire individual contractors. I can, create equity. I can do all sorts of stuff that a corporation, any corporation that can do the things and rights that the state has bestowed, the trust can too. The difference is that the trust doesn't have to ask permission.